Hello and welcome to The Week in the Wild, a new series of programmes brought to you by theweek.co.uk and Nat Geo Wild. I'm Ollie Mann. You'd normally hear me presenting The Week Unwrapped, a current affairs podcast hosted by The Week, but today I am in visual form to celebrate and complement Nat Geo Wild's beautiful new three-part series, Paradise Islands. And essentially, I'm just going to ask one question. If you could preserve the natural beauty of just one place in the world, where would it be? Well, thankfully, I don't have to decide. My panel is here to help me do that. I'm joined today by Adrian Kale, a cameraman producing natural history programmes for the BBC, ITV, as well as, of course, National Geographic. Benedict Allen, a real-life 21st century explorer. Touch him, he is real. Dr. Nisha Owen, who runs the Edge of Existence programme, looking into threatened species around the world. Craig Jones, who's a professional wildlife photographer. You can see his images online. And so too is Will Burrard-Lucas, who specialises in using high-tech gadgets to get super close to his subjects. When it comes to where in the world, out of all the places you've visited, that you would want absolutely untouched and forever beautiful, Adrian, where would you choose?
The Indonesian island of Sulawesi. It's one of the few places on Earth that's got a combination of Australian and Asian wildlife. And I think it's actually featured in the Paradise series. And it's extraordinary because you're seeing a marsupial, like a bear couscous in a tree, which you'd think, well, it should be in Australia. It's a marsupial. What's it doing here? That's one anomaly in itself. But it's the whole relationship between that island and the species that are so wonderfully intertwined. You know, things from the giant ficus trees, breaking the sky, beautiful sights, but then they get infested by a parasitic plant called a strangle fig, and these strangle figs ultimately wrap round and suffocate this ficus tree. But it leaves this wonderful framework of roots going around this big tree. And within that framework of roots, you've got tarsiers, spectral tarsiers living, which were just mind-blowing to film. They're the world's only wholly carnivorous primate. They've got little faces like Nosferatu. So they've got these little fangs, and they're fully nocturnal. And by day, Sulawesi crested macaques are using that same tree, but for different purposes, for displaying, for play, for whatever. But the tarsiers are linked to the tree. What's also linked to the tree is the insect prey they feed on. The tarsiers themselves are preyed on by great big reticulated pythons, and also the monkeys. The monkeys are preyed, so the Sulawesi crested macaques that use the trees. So you might have a horribly distressing moment one day where you're filming and you're doing all the stuff, and then you see a great big python laboured through a tree with what I'd call monkey belly, where it's had one of your, which you may have been filming the day before. But everything about it, from things like the red-knobbed hornbill, it's a hugely impressive big red hornbill, big red casque on the top of its head. And that was also in the top of this ficus tree, and that's nesting. All this within the ecosystem of this ficus tree and strangle fig. So it's extraordinary.
Good case. Let's beat that, chaps. Who wants to go first? Will, where would you save in the world?
It's such a hard question that I've sort of got two answers. My heart is in Africa, so a country like Kenya with these, you know, impressive animals like elephants and lions. Those are the animals that get my pulse going. But my head would probably say somewhere like Brazil, where you've got the Amazon rainforest, the biggest rainforest on Earth. I think around 70% of that rainforest is in Brazil, and that obviously harbours an incredible diversity of wildlife, from jaguars and giant anteaters, dolphins even, down to the smallest insects. But then the rainforest itself, you know, the rainforest is often being called the lungs of the earth because they do so much for our atmosphere. And so by just protecting Brazil, you could obviously protect a large chunk of rainforest. So I think of any country in the world, possibly that would make the biggest difference, just protecting that.
And the fact that it's got the rainforest in it, I mean, Nisha, that's actually quite important, isn't it? Because I imagine there are whole parts of the rainforest completely unexplored still.
Absolutely, there's still a lot of species remaining to be found in places like the Amazon. But I think this choice of an island or a nation is a very difficult one, particularly for me. So I am focused on celebrating and conserving the diversity of life. So being able to pick one particular area would jeopardise everywhere else. And I think
not my problem, mate. I've given you very clear instructions. You've got to
but
do
I think
something.
there's a few kind of amazing examples that you could think of. So obviously, like you said, you've got oceanic islands, so Madagascar, where lemurs have diversified to fill niches that are nowhere else, that other species in other places. So the eye that replaces the woodpecker, so tapping at the bark to pull out grubs in the same way that a woodpecker would. You've got the island of Escudo, so the pygmy three-toed sloth that demonstrates what's called island dwarfism. So over 9,000 years, it's become smaller and smaller and smaller to fit perfectly into those habitats. You've also got what we call sky islands, so mountaintop islands. So I worked in the Eastern Arc Mountains of Tanzania, which have more endemic species per square kilometre than anywhere else on the entire planet. And you've got the Cyclops Mountains in Papua New Guinea, where you find long-beaked echidnas, which are mammals, spiny mammals that lay eggs. So you've got all of these fascinating species that are restricted to islands. How could you possibly pick one?
Okay, but nonetheless, I'd like you to pick one. Is there one out of all of those that is actually most at threat at the moment of extinction?
I think there's one island in particular, actually. So Cuba is one of the most biodiverse islands in Latin America. It's also been called the accidental Eden because basically it's been forgotten about. So technology, economic development has passed it by for various political reasons, which means that you still have these amazing patches of biodiversity. So you have the Cuban selenodon, which is one of the world's only venomous mammals. It's a small mammal that injects poison through its incisors. The Cuban funnel-eared bat, which is a bat that's found in only a single hot cave in Cuba that reaches temperatures of 40 degrees centigrade.
There you are. I think I got you to choose a place. I think you said Cuba. Okay, and actually that neatly leads us on to you, Benedict, because when you're talking about places that haven't been developed technologically and by sort of Western society, and you mentioned Cuba, you're only talking about 6 decades. When you talk about some of the places you've explored famously with tribes and stuff, you're going back centuries.
Yeah, Papua New Guinea is the island I go for. It's the largest tropical island on the planet, and it's not just the ecosystems, it's the diversity of peoples. 850 different language groups. There's nowhere so linguistically diverse on the planet. And then, of course, the wildlife. When we talk about paradise, birds of paradise, 39 species. The reason why they've been able to evolve is because of the lack of predators. We're talking about the Wallace line. There aren't many mammal predators there, rats and so on. And there's also a huge number of fruit tree species like the ficus or ficus, which allow the males to display in the most extraordinary way. And these extraordinary displays are just, for me, a sort of emblem of the island, a sort of symbol of something that we would miss if we destroyed this extraordinary place. They're the sort of crown, really, of Papua New Guinea.
Craig?
Difficult to answer, but I'm going to go with Sumatra, an Indonesian island. It's got the equator going through the middle. Active volcano, and it's home to 4 of the world's rarest animals: the Sumatran orangutan, the Sumatran tiger, the Sumatran rhinoceros, and the Sumatran elephant. It's got different tribes. It's got some of the most beautiful, diverse rainforests in the world, from pitcher plants all the way through to these apex predators. And obviously, in the centre, there's Batantui, which is almost a subspecies of orangutan, which is, a subspecies of the Sumatran orangutan, which experts reckon that's where the original orangutans came from. Plates moved, Borneo, Indonesia, Sumatra. Longer fur, darker, less facial hair, they're kind of different. And if you mention orangutan, people think of Borneo, which they're also under the cosh. Now, under the cosh is my slang for in danger, really.
Well, let's talk about that, because Nisha, Greg's right, obviously, that there are elements of Western culture which create endangered situations for these species. But that's not the only reason, is it? I mean, what are the biggest reasons that animals are endangered in all the places that we've talked about?
Well, it's interesting because the region of Southeast Asia and those Paradise Islands are some of the most threatened regions on the planet because of a variety of reasons. There's a very dramatically increasing human population. They are places that produce a lot of palm oil, pulp, paper. So you have an awful lot of plantations, some of which are sustainable, some of which obviously much less so. And then you have all of the pressures that go with huge amounts of deforestation. So they've experienced the greatest levels of deforestation worldwide in the last few decades, many of them losing 50% or more of their forests. So in those particular areas, there is really a lot of pressure for us to move quickly.
Thanks, guys. And if you want a reminder of all the natural beauty that we should be preserving, find out more from us on The Week at theweek.co.uk. I've been Ollie Mann, and remember to watch these programmes on Nat Geo Wild when they're on as well. You will, I promise, we've confirmed, be entertained as well as educated.